everybody. Welcome and thank you so much for being here to our debut authors panel featuring Benjamin Garcia, Emily Hashimoto, and Poupeh Missaghi, hosted by Lupita Aquino, also known as Lupita Reads. These books are all out on three small presses we love: Milkweed Editions, The Feminist Press, and Copper Canyon Press. Definitely follow them if you don't already. My name's Evan Karp. I'm the events manager for Booksmith. We're an independent bookstore and a mainstay of San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district since 1976. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce the authors. Benjamin Garcia's first collection of poems, Thrown in the Throat, was selected for the 2019 National Poetry Series by Kazim Ali and published by Milkweed Editions. He's a 2019 he's a 2019 Lambda Literary Fellow, was the 2017 Latinx Scholar at the Frost Place, and was a 2018 Canto Mundo Fellow at the Palm Beach Poetry Festival. His work has recently appeared or is forthcoming in American Poetry Review, Best New Poets 2018, Crazy Horse, Kenyon Review, the Missouri Review, and New England Review. Garcia received his MFA from Cornell University and currently works as a sexual health and harm reduction educator in the Finger Lakes region of New York. Benjamin, welcome and congratulations on your book. Emily Hashimoto is a queer writer of color from the suburbs of New Jersey. She's a graduate of Rutgers University with a degree in women's and gender studies and her MS in information science from Pratt Institute. She's received fellowships from VONA and Queer Arts. Her nonfiction writing has appeared in The Rumpus and Bitch magazine, centering feminist critique and queer narratives. She lives in New York City with her wife and child. Emily, welcome and congratulations. And Poupeh Missaghi is a writer, a translator, both into and out of Persian, an editor, and an educator. She holds a PhD in English and creative writing from the University of Denver, an MA in creative writing from Johns Hopkins University, and an MA in translation studies. Her debut novel, Trans-Relating House One, was published by Coffee House Press in February of 2020. Her nonfiction, fiction, and translations have appeared in numerous journals, and she has several books of translation published in Iran. I'll Be Strong for You, her translation of Iranian author Nassim Merashi's novel, is forthcoming in spring 2021. As an editor, she worked for many years with Asymptote and is co-editor of Matters of Feminist Practice from Belladonna Collaborative. She's currently a visiting assistant professor at the Department of Writing at the Pratt Institute, Brooklyn, a faculty member at the low residency MFA of Pacific Northwest College of Art, Portland, as well as a writing consultant at Baruch College, CUNY-NY. Poupeh, welcome and congratulations to you on the book. Lots of talent here tonight, and I'm grateful to Lupita Aquino, better known as Lupita Reads, for moderating this panel. Lupita is a passionate reader, active in both the local and online book community through her Instagram account at lupita.reads. She's the creator of the hashtag Latinx Bookstagram Tour, a columnist for the Washington Independent Review of Books, a contributor for the Reading Women podcast, and the co-founder and current moderator curator for Lit on 8th Street Book Club. Lupita, thank you for moderating, and Benjamin, Emily, Poupeh, congratulations on your books, and thank you all so much for being here tonight.
I know, thank you so much to Booksmith for hosting us, and I mean, I could not agree more. I mean, we have like so much talent here. It's like amazing. So before we get into any questions, I would love to, I was able to read all of your works, and I really would love to be able to hear you guys read. So if we could start with that, and we'll start with Emily. If you could just read briefly from your amazing novel.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm going to read just like a little snack. And I think the thing to tell you is, oh, yes, thank you. Ba in Gujarati means grandmother, grandma. Okay. When Ba died in July, the mourning hit her immediately and all at once. No stages. It felt so foreign to experience such deep despair, like an archaic sequence of DNA had suddenly activated. In the few days after, she went through the motions of being alive, eating and sleeping and breathing, but it all felt plastic and phony. Her father shaved his head as was custom. She watched him do it, leaning against the bathroom wall. They didn't talk anymore. Not really, but he didn't tell her to leave, even as silent tears ran down his cheeks, a scene unknown to her until that day. She knew they were bound by the same grief, though they couldn't share those words, but she still wanted to tell him, tell everyone. Quickly, quietly, she picked up her father's electric razor and took it to her own head, letting years of hair fall to the tile. She had never used this device before, and her hand shook. He pried it from her hand and finished the job, his doctor's grasp even and still. He set his hands on her shoulders, the first time they had touched in years, and they both looked at each other in the mirror. His eyes were red and inflamed, hers tearing up. She cleaned up after them, her long and his short black hair mingling together on the bathroom floor. Now they were the same.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Poupeh, could you read from One Translate? And I have your book too, so.
Yay, thank you.
You can see all the marks I have in here too.
Oh, I actually have the same.
Awesome.
Just gonna read one small page from the question layers of the book. How to bear the void, how to bear loss on one's skin, on one's hair, on one's lashes, on one's nails, on one's nerves, on one's cells, in one's heart, on one's tongue. How to translate loss into language, how to survive loss. What is at the center of loss, at the center of life after loss? How much time needs to pass before mourning can become healing, can become living? How can we walk the distance that separates you and me, you and us, who became one and the other because a shared experience exploded into an abyss of unshared history, memory, story? How can we walk the distance and arrive on the other side, alive and generous, capable of light and love, reaching in and reaching out with a touch and a tone that can make joy and be joy? Are we, as we walk, leaving the dead behind? Are we leaving ourselves behind? What about guilt? What about shame? Mine and yours, ours and yours. How to bear memory, how to bear witness.
Thank you so much. And Benjamin, I'm holding up this stunning, I also have tabs here too. I'm holding up your stunning cover.
I will read one of the poems in here. So this is from Thrown in the Throat. Thank you so much for having me. This is really awesome. And I'm just gonna go ahead and read it. The Great Glass Closet. This is not a metaphor. When I say that I lived in the closet, it's because I lived in the closet. You might too if you shared a one-bedroom apartment with 11 other people and a pet. Mother, stepfather, brother, 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 uncle, aunt, cousin, 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 dog. Then there's me, the surplus. You could have called our closet a walk-in closet in the sense that a child's body could walk in. Mine did, and I called it home. It was comfortable enough if you were willing to lie. I was. I lived in a confession booth, listening to my own secrets, making my own sentences. Confession. My uncle was different in a way you could see. I was different in a way you could see. Only if you were looking. If you were looking, I could see. What I mean is that my uncle walked on crutches, so he couldn't cross the border by foot. He climbed into the trunk of a car, which is a kind of closet. I was like my uncle, and I was not like my uncle. He walked on crutches and I didn't. Confession. During prayers, I don't close my eyes. Nobody knows this except the other people who don't close their eyes. A life in the closet is a life that's closed, so I opened what I could. Books. I was Harry Potter, the boy who lived, reading about the boy who lived. I had no owl, no hat, no wand. I couldn't cast a spell and I couldn't spell, but I could see the low in owl. I could pull the hat out of that, and in the word wand, find another hidden and. Reading X-Men, I wanted to be Storm so that I could end the famine in my family's village, looking like a badass bitch queen goddess doing it. I knew this was impossible because I wasn't claustrophobic enough. I could never be Storm. I survived too many storms behind a closet door, and I could never change my name to Storm, which at its core contains an or, as in either or, as in Aurora Monroe, Storm's birth name. You must choose pink or blue, boy or girl, left or right or wrong, truth or lie, truth or dare. Truth. Even writing this, I thought that feminine shared an A with famine. Feminine. Dare. Hunger for errors. Find another place to stick a man inside. Reading, I learned the difference between cloth and clothe, also the difference between close, meaning to shut, and close, meaning almost there. I'm going to stop there. It's a longer poem, but I will pause for the sake of time.
Oh, thank you. And thank you everybody for reading. It's been like a joy for me because of the way that I make voices in my head when I'm reading through your books. And so it's just to be able to pair the two is phenomenal. And I hope those that are joining us really enjoyed that too. So we're going to jump into some quick group questions, and then I have some individual questions for you as well. And then we'll do an audience Q&A. So I'm just letting anybody know that's tuning in, like, be ready. If you guys have questions, type them in and we'll fold them in. So, again, as a reader, something that I find myself often doing is like searching for the moment that the title of your book somehow is folded into the book, right? So I just feel like it's such a magical moment, and I'd love to hear from you. I'd love if you could talk to us about the titles of your book and perhaps the moment that you knew it was like the perfect fit for your book. And how about we start with Benjamin?
The title is one of the last things that came together for this book. The structure and the title were giving me such a hard time. And like, even after it was accepted for publication, I was like, is this the right title? Does this fit? Because I wasn't trusting why I made that choice. And part of what led me to that was sort of thinking about, what do these poems have in common? Like, some of them are so different from each other in terms of topic. Like, how does an immigrant experience fit and relate to being queer? Right. Like, what's the overlap in that? And things related to the mouth kept coming up. So like, there are food poems, stuff about sex or just language, Spanish and English. Like, it was just so many things related to the mouth that I knew it was something there. And I don't know, just thinking about the throat as like a gateway into your body. Yeah. And it kind of came from one of the lines in the poem. It's not an exact lifting of one of the lines, but there's a poem in there that says, my throne is my throat, or my throat is my throne. And so it was sort of a play on that of, there's a lot of homophones and like things that sound like just wordplay. And so yeah, the title was another opportunity to fold that in. And I don't know. Like
I know when I read that part, I just like, it was like a moment for me. I just needed to sit back, which was the line that it was powerful.
So that's sort of, what brought that together. And I'm glad that I kept that. And I think that it fits with the book.
Yeah, no, for sure. Again, everybody needs this book. Like, I'm obsessed with it, and all of them, every book here. But yeah, how about Poupeh?
Yeah, I started with another title, and that was like the structure of the book was also different in the beginning. So the title kind of matched the earlier format, but even like the format changed later, but at some point the translating House One title came up. I don't know how or what was the moment exactly, but while writing the book, I kept thinking about like how this is a work of translation, even though I'm writing it in English, and how the book is helping me to relate to this moment in history and to this city in a new way, and also relating it to other people in a new language, in a new style. So that's how Transrelating came together, and House One came as part of like the dream drawings. So when it appeared, I just knew that's like the Transrelating is Transrelating House One. So House One came through the process of like the dream kind of like synthesis, and how that image came through. And it just felt so relevant to the essence of the work, and I just stayed with it.
Yeah, and the imagery with the words and the dream sequence, it really draws you in, I think, as a reader.
Right. So the story of that like the House One in that drawing is that like I wrote down all the dreams in a year, and then like used the cloud generator. And those were the two words that were repeated most in the dreams. And it just felt correct because I was also translating a house that felt my first house. So it just like, it worked.
Perfect. Thank you. Emily?
Yeah, so A World Between came about. I fought very hard for a long time for Continuum. The book, really references Adrienne Rich's work about the idea of a lesbian, lesbian, it was the 70s, lesbian continuum. And I thought like, that's it. That's what the book is about. It's about connection. It's about time. It's, but I got advice that continuum from like a book marketing perspective is not a good sound. In talking about mouths, it's not a good sound in the mouth. Continuum, and just sort of so that could be a hiccup for me. So I took that note finally, and I think there was just a lot of back and forth. I worked really heavily with a mentor on this book, Sarah Schulman, and actually it was her idea, her title. I think trying to think about both the world of two people, what you create, when you're in love, whatever that love might be, friendship, romantic love, but, so a world between two people, but then of course, what separates them, the world that lives in between them. So it felt great. And I will be honest though, there was combing poetry and song lyrics. I went a lot of places with my editor Jisoo Kim, and but we just kept coming back to this and just said like, this is it. And it still feels, I don't know if you all feel this way, but I still also feel funny to have it named in any way. It just feels sort of strange for some reason, because it kind of exists for me without a name too. It's my book. It's a baby. So there's that too. But it does feel right, and I think it's felt right for a really long time.
I mean, and Poupeh or Benjamin, if either of you want to speak to whether or not, you feel the same way in terms of actually having a title. Either one.
I guess with titles, that there are multiple ways of titling something is kind of relieving too, right? Like it's hard for me to think of something being the wrong title. Like, you chose that for a reason. And especially once it's out there, I feel like, it's like naming a kid or something.
Right.
The world, right? Like you're not gonna say, oh, you know what? I should have really named you something else, right? Like,
right.
I feel like it's like very like, you just feel it in your gut, like you play with it less, and then at some point, like one of them just like sits so well that like then you look at the other ones and you're like, no, none of them really work anymore. This is like what I'm gonna stay with.
Did you want to say something, Benjamin? I was like,
so I wanted to ask about like alternate titles, because I definitely had titles that I tried out and didn't quite fit. Like I tried, my thesis was named like Zeroscape. It was not a good title at all, and didn't end up becoming my book. but I tried like worm tongue. I tried the language in question. Like there were so many, you know, it was like putting on a clothing and just being like, no, it's not the right fit. And then just kept going. So I don't know if you had other like titles that you considered.
My main one, that's like the first folder on my laptop, started with art, corpses, and dreams. And that was just like literally like the sections of the earlier version. And I just loved like how like, I still like feel like that could work, but then for some reason, like it was very, very direct, very like it would reveal like everything about the book. So then like this one came up. I think like that was the only other one that I played with for a long time. And I remember.
I like that. That's kind of a grab. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but that's like, I don't know, right in the face. I like that a lot. I think when I think about titles, I'm also just thinking too about the cover and how much we went back and forth on cover. And I think what struck me was sort of the fun of that. That was whipped cream on the sundae, and title too in some ways, because it's, I would say it's like both sort of like, I think super important and sort of like, it's not the book, right? Because the book starts right after the title, right after the cover. And so some of that is just sort of about how to make sure people read it or to make sure that they understand what they have in their hands. But I think it didn't always feel to me sort of like a truly like, this is the writer part, you know, this is the veggie meat of it.
And I love that. I mean, I don't know if, you know, as you were working and as debut authors, if there's something that like, maybe something like cover work or design work on your cover that no one ever really mentioned, like the joys of it. So, you know, just off the chances, there's something that, you know, you discovered through the process that it was actually kind of like a delight or a joy. I'm sorry, I'm listening to Ross Gay, like the Book of Delights. So now like everything in my life is like a delight. So. And Poupeh or Benjamin?
I didn't realize how much I cared about like the cover, I guess, because until it started becoming real, and then like every single little thing, like, is this the right shade of yellow? Is this, you know, like, is this the right font? Like, can we place it slightly to the left so that this show, you know, it was just every little thing. And so I felt really spoiled because Mary Austin Speaker, who did the cover art, or not the cover art, the design, was so understanding and like didn't make me feel bad for being so picky. And I was just so grateful for that, because I'm really happy with the way that it turned out.
Yeah, and you're the artist of the cover work shares the same name as you, right?
Yeah. So
Fun fact.
I kind of like that because it feels like another pun, like another like year of like playing with language.
I feel like your cover, Benjamin, like feels so much, it just feels so much like the poems. Like there's like such a like tactile feeling to like it. It's just like as if it has come out of the world of the poems. It's great. I was just like very thankful that I could actually like collaborate with coffee house people on the cover, because I know that not everybody gets the chance to do that. And also like, especially like for my book, like there are so many bad examples of like books about like the Middle East, especially written by women, like that the covers are just like awful. So I had like a list of like a very long list of like, I don't want any of these to appear on my cover. So I'm like very grateful that like there was that collaboration, and the artist whose work appears on the cover, we have known each other for more than 20 years, Sara Dolatabadi. And some of the, so this is like a picture from an installation that she did that included some of her paintings. But she used to have like her studio in my childhood bedroom for a while. So it's just like felt very like personal and intimate for my first book as well. Yeah.
Emily?
I think one thing that came up for me, I think you talking about sort of what you didn't want. And I think sort of, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, Lupita, do you have a good genre name for my book? I don't have a good sense. I think it's, I wouldn't necessarily.
I didn't want to like put it in any bucket, honestly. Like I was really, when I was talking about it, I didn't call it one thing or another. I just let it be.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think because it's been called a romance novel, and like I'll totally take it. There are some badass romance novels, but I don't know that that's like the right exact. But I think I was just really conscious of that, and I think being a woman and not, like certain shades, right? I think I was just super deliberate. Like yes, blue felt really right. Again, the world thing, and I love Benjamin totally. I think talking about shades of yellow. I think I was very serious about that, and the yellow links, the yellow title links to this kind of one loop of it. But yeah, I think just being really conscious too, right, of the things I didn't want, and I think the things I've seen in other covers that I think, again, it's like that marketing piece is just it's so funny to think about, but it's so real. It's one of the realest things, even before people encounter what you've done, and I think sometimes those covers can be really like. I'll just speak about myself. I can sometimes dismiss those books, and actually they're wonderful gems of things. But you don't. So it's interesting. I think when you kind of look at it, I think that's what I found in the beginning of the process was, what does the cover say? And so my editor and I went back and forth a lot in that process, and sort of figuring out. What we wanted to say and what other covers are saying. And so it was a whole, talk about debut author. I mean, it was a whole process I'd never thought about before, didn't know anything about. It was fascinating.
No, I think that they all work so well. I mean, as a reader, who is looking to what they'll read next, for sure, cover art and titles, yeah, although they shouldn't matter, they end up mattering in a weird way. But I do want to go back to, I feel like a common theme that I noticed in all of your works is just this idea of the way you write about home. And I think each of you do it in such a unique way. And I was wondering if you could expand on the ways in which you explore that idea in your work. And let's start with Poupeh.
I didn't actually start out, or even in the process of writing this book, I wasn't thinking specifically about I'm going to write this book centering it around the idea of home. That definitely was on my mind for this is going to be my next book, because it was a project that I also started at some point while I was working on this book. But I think it's just one of those themes that comes up in many of my works. It's just present in all of them. But in translating House One, I feel for me, home is so much so tightly related, not to just people, but also to the city landscape. And just the way one can be present in a city, or what is present in a city, what is absent in a city. And not just in the sense of what we do in a city space, or what kind of actions or which places we hang out. There's I feel each city has a soul to it, has a feeling to it, and that feeling just makes something home, a place home or not home. And that was one of the things that I definitely wanted to work with in the book. And I think my intention was to show different layers of that in the different ways that this homeness exists in a city. There's the city layer where it's more about the life in the city, and there's also the corpses layer where it's about the losses that each place carries in its body. And then like the questions, the intellectual aspect, which is like you step out of the city and just think about it, right? And then the dreams, which is like not necessarily like the conscious world, but it's so heavily affected by our waking life existing in the city, right? So it's just like, how do we exist in a city with the people in the city, with family, with friends, with everything that makes that city a whole? And how does that become home, right? And how do we carry that within ourselves? I think that was like definitely something that I was trying to work with.
Yeah, and for me, that's definitely something that just kept, you know, even with like something, the subtlety of like the missing pieces, you know, as you're flipping through the book and the missing art pieces. And you know, I just thought about my everyday places where I go for a walk. And if suddenly something was missing, you know, how would I just interact with that in my conscience? So definitely something that I really loved about your work. Emily?
I think for me, like making a note, since I had a baby, I can't remember anything anymore. So I'm just jotting this down. But I think because of the time periods of the book, that they are, you know, in college, and then they're in their 20s, and then they're in their early 30s, and that arc from like, go, you know, if you go to college and you live at college and you come home on that, you know, in the summertime, you know, your parents' home sometimes is still home, and then it changes, and then you have that apartment and then another apartment and then other apartment, and you change cities, and you know that like your sense of home, I think, is still day to day. It's like, where's your coffee machine, where's your bedspread, but it doesn't necessarily have that same sort of like sense of permanence, I think, at a certain point maybe in life, or maybe, you know, maybe for always. And I think too, though, but the book is really, I think, about the ways that another person is home. And as we know, you know, home isn't always a stable, happy, that's not always a place of like total safety, or maybe it's some safety and some comfort, but it's not everything you need. And so I think the ways in which that changes in a physical place, in a literal place, I think also really does and can show up, you know, in another person, that maybe like that feeling of coming home to a person. And I guess I mean that like literally and not, but I think that for me is where that like that home thread definitely resides.
Yeah. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but for sure, definitely like this idea of somebody being home outside of, you know, wherever they are in whatever part of their growth as a person, but how they could always continually be home. I think that's something that's huge that I loved about your novel too. Benjamin?
When I was thinking about this question, I was like, what am I going to say about home? Because I didn't necessarily like think about that deliberately while I was writing. I mean, I must have been thinking about it on some level, because it's definitely there once I start thinking about it, like, you know, looking backward. But I guess it was just so part of why it's heavily in there, this idea of home, is because so many of these poems are about family. And so like there's like the family of the home of your family, and that they create, and then there's like the home that you carve out for yourself, and like home as a place of like safety and shelter, but also as a place of its own kind of trauma and danger. And then like just the body as home. So
I was just
like,
gonna say that.
you know, you're living, there's like the home that's outside, and then like your body is just a home, like, you know, being comfortable with your body, and taking care of, like, just the body as home, I guess is one of the things that comes up for me.
Yeah, and I was reading, I believe, an interview, and you mentioned that a lot of the themes are sex and food and what we consume. And I mean, could you expand on that? Because I loved that.
Well, don't know how, I guess the reason that those are in there is just sort of a way of celebrating, especially sex, and just being more open to speaking about it. Like, so much of my work involves like this philosophy of sex positivity and being affirming, which is different than being accepting of someone or like tolerant of someone. But to be affirming, like, is not superficial. It's not about me as the person. It's about providing something for someone else. And I think comes from a little bit of a different place. And so that's sort of food and sex, I guess, are about pleasure and celebration, and nourishing, I guess, in some way, to your body or, other aspects of you. But yeah, so I mean, that's food and sex definitely come through in a lot of these poems. It's also something that's been really great to have, like, during quarantine, right? Like, definitely food and sex are still something that we can enjoy, celebrate. Like, that we've been watching the Great British Bake Off, and every time we watch that, I'm like, oh, I need to make some, like, I need to have cake now. I need to have cookies.
I ended up buying my wife a KitchenAid because she binge watches that show. So that was a Christmas present.
You mean the mixer, like the big mixer?
Yeah, that like fancy.
Mwah.
I had no idea it was going to be such a big hit. It was like I did the best thing in the world, but here we are, food and sex. So I'm conscious of the time. I know we have, we're dwindling down. So if anyone in the audience has any questions, please go ahead, push them forward. I do have a few more questions for you guys. So we'll keep going. I did want to just go back to Poupeh and, really the missing art, and then the stories with the bodies that you fold in to your novel. A lot of that you mentioned is factual. So I was really, it's factual, but it's, some of it is fictionalized. And I wanted to ask you about your research process and, just writing about something so difficult.
Yeah. So the information about the statues and the details included in the corpses entries, they're not actually fictionalized. They're just like, everything is just like the facts that I could find. And the premise for that, the city layer is fictionalized, but the statues and the bodies are not fictionalized. And my premise was, I didn't want to try to find information that was not accessible to an ordinary person. So I just was like, I'm just gonna work as just any person would just go online and try to just follow these threads and find as much information as I could. And I started the research pretty early after 2009 when the book is like focused on. So a lot of information was still just being published and it was floating around. So it was easier to find stuff. And I had also like heard something, so I knew like where to start and like where to go to. But basically like all of it was like, I'm just gonna go online and try to find as much information about any of these individuals. But it's like, to give you an example, so like, for example, like for one of the people who appear in the book, there was like a 2-minute video on YouTube about before he died. And I watched that video like a whole day on repeat, trying to just like excavate like any kind of like detail that I could get from that video. Or like there were interviews with the parents or friends. There were like a lot of like reports that journalists had written. So there was like a lot of like sources. There was also, what was interesting was like when this book took 7 years. So like when, like after a few years, I went back to just like retrace some of my sources and like do editing, I noticed that some of the links had disappeared. So I couldn't like get back into like the websites or find the text that I had read. Like I knew that I had read this information. I even had like a visual memory of like what the website looked like, but it just like was not there anymore. So then that led me into like just like tweaking the language a bit, so that was also brought in, like the fact that even the information could disappear, right? So I didn't realize how hard it was while I was doing it. But after it was done, I realized like that it really took a lot out of me to be able to just like sit with all of this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even as you're writing, and to see these things that you vividly know and are processing and writing suddenly disappear, there's a certain type of additional heavy mourning that, you know, I think would be added to that.
Yeah, then it also like adds this layer of like, was this like true information? Was this factual, or did I imagine this, or like what happened here? Like it just like causes you to also reconsider what was real and what was fictional.
Yeah, and you know, I was really struck by something that you said in your acknowledgements, which was, and I'm going to quote it. I'm reading from it. So, this book is my share of a collective attempt to care for that seed, the seed that keeps growing in and with the body of Iran, even if I am far away from it. And so, you know, I was just wondering if you could expand on the quote, and if writing helped you feel closer to Iran. You know, and as someone who is an immigrant here too, I know that feeling of like loving a country and being far away from it and wanting to contribute in somehow, but not just, you know, kind of, I don't know.
So the part about the seed comes from a quote from one of the leaders of the Green Movement. And I'm just going to read that quote from him. He said, this is by Mir Hossein Mousavi. He said, "Hope is the seed of our identity." So that's the seed that I'm referring to. And I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that like what this book is just like one like tiny part of a collective attempt. So that was very important for me. And just like to think about like you mentioned like being close to Iran or getting close to it. I feel like I'm never not close to Iran. It has like such a strong presence with me, like every second of every day. But it transformed my relationship. Like it made it much more internal. It made it much more intimate. So that's like the change that happened because of the book. And the weird thing is also like I was in Iran in 2009. So part of the experience was also like me being there and experiencing like the events of 2009, the protests, and then the process of the book, revisiting these moments. And I was traveling back home still while I was writing the book. But since the book has come out, I have not been able to go back anymore. So there's also like that weird like shift that has happened.
And again, another type of difficulty and mourning that, you know, you shift through. So thank you. So I did want to talk to you, Benjamin, about something that really stood out to me in your collection, which was just the storytelling of it all. It's, you know, I feel like poetry often gets this idea that everything is kind of, you know, it's collected, but it's not. And I was just curious about the organization of your collection, because it really did just feel like you were peeling layers into a story.
Yeah, I mean, so again, the structure was one of the last things that came together for me. Like, it was so hard to figure out how these poems about things that I didn't see like the clear connection between fit together. Like, what was I gonna, how would I structure it? And most poetry books that I read, right, are like in 3 sections, 4 sections. And so I thought, okay, well, I have to put my book into sections, right? Like, I'm gonna make 3 sections, and section 1 is like all of my things related to like Spanish and immigration, to Mexican identity and heritage, and the second one will be like the queer poems. The last one could be like everything else that didn't fit into those categories, I guess. And when I did that, like it was so wrong. And part of the reason that was wrong is like, when I would read through them that way, it was just too much of the same thing. First of all, like in one area, it was like all of the odes put together. The energy in those poems is so intense that like, if I put them all next to each other, you get tired of reading them. Like, it's just a lot, like it's, one of the things that I removed sections entirely. And I have 2 series of poems in the collection. And those really helped, because what I ended up doing instead of doing sections was dividing those and kind of braiding them in to the other poems. And so when I was doing that, that felt a lot more natural. So I mean, I had to go through like, and continue to tweak it, but that felt like a much more natural arrangement. And part of that was like, you know, I don't exist in like these boxes that are exclusive from each other. Like, I'm queer and I'm Mexican at the same time. Like, that doesn't, so why would I put them into these 2 separate categories, right? Like, and so finding that overlap was what helped me braid everything together.
And it just flows so well. Like,
I was so worried about that, and the title were always like the things that I was so uncertain about.
I text a friend who, you know, a book lover. She's the owner of Blended District, and she the first thing she said was like, I've read poems, and he decolonizes poetry like no one can. And I'm not a poetry expert, so she broke it down, and I'm just like, the power of it is it's amazing.
Thank you.
Emily, I wanted to go back though and ask you about this idea of your novel not having a genre. I know it's not a romance, right? But there is an element of romance that I feel like we don't really see much in romance, or even in books, is just this idea of self-love, right? Without spoiling the end. But I was wondering if you could talk about that and learn, you know, where it came from.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I'm honest, you know, starting as it's sort of the grandmother of this book is When Harry Met Sally. And so, you know, I think, you know, but browner, but queerer, you know, so I think kind of in those translations, I think it sort of ended up where it did in an earlier draft. But I think it really missed in terms of one of my aims, which was a feminist love story. And that felt really important to me. So that meant a lot of things. It meant like enthusiastic consent. It meant equal screen time. It meant equal sections, you know, sort of hearing both their voices and not just sort of having one kind of gaze on it. But then I think it's as you said, I think that sort of maybe came along, I think kind of just really trying to reinforce it. Like, to me, the book has a very happy ending because they are where they need to be. But perhaps it is not a traditional ending to a love story. But for me, that's what it was just sort of like, if they are where they need to be on their journey, they'll go many more places after the book finishes. But like leaving them in good shape felt like, you know, as their creator, that felt like my job, kind of, you know, and I put them through the ringer before we get there. But I think it just felt, yeah, it felt like what I wanted to see. And I think too, because it came on later, but Communion by Bell Hooks was, I think, possibly, that was like the first Bell Hooks book I ever read. It was like a total revelation to me. And then the book is sort of, it talks a lot, because that was of its time, but it talks a lot about that book, Men Are from Mars, Women Are from Venus. But it is obviously super different, and it's a reference point, but it's really about, again, sort of like, what is it to be a feminist, and what is it to consider issues of love and sex and romance and friendship and queerness, definitely though with an intersectional lens as well, because it's Bell Hooks. And so I remember reading that, and it was like a total light bulb moment. So I sort of lent that out to them, that idea of just sort of, what is love if you don't, it sounds so ridiculous to say out loud, but just right. Like, what is love if you don't just love yourself? That sounds very simple. We should all know it. We don't all know it, I guess. I think that's sort of what I've learned in life. And so I think to me, it's like starting there is a great, is a very fruitful place, I think, for further exploration. And then I think, what does that look like then when you have that sense of self-love, and then you go out into the world, meeting other people, interacting with other people, colliding with other people. And I think that what comes after that is interesting. And I think, I don't know that we see a lot.
Yeah, no, I was one of those people that was a little startled and upset by the ending. And then I had that moment, I don't know if you guys have seen that internet meme where the guy's doing the math in his head, where he's just like, and so I did like the math in my head. I was like, no, this is a good thing. So it was like, this is reality.
But I will also say, it seems like people put their own spin on it. So it's sort of like whatever you bring, like people, again, without giving anything away too much, but I think, it seems like when I talk to people, they're like, oh, this is what happens after, right? I'm like, yeah, that's exactly right. Sure. And I've heard a million different versions. And so it's a very cool thing that people sort of, like run with it and take it somewhere else. That's been just like a pleasure, an unexpected pleasure.
I love to hear that. And I'm going to ask people to tell me on Instagram.
Okay.
So we have an audience question, and I realized, like, wow, we're almost done. And that makes me sad, because I feel like we have so many more questions. All right, Christine Smith says, I would love to know about how these artists approach genre, poetry, novel translation. I wonder if they could talk about any crossover they see within their own work. I'm just going to say, whoever is ready to take it, just go ahead.
I can say a few words. When I'm working on, or at least when I was working on this manuscript, I wasn't thinking about genre at all. I was just like, this is an experience that I want to go back to through language, and whatever genre and whatever form it takes, that's totally fine with me. And I think it was like somewhere like in the middle of like the publication process that my editor and I were talking about, like, so should we call this a novel, right? So we didn't even know that it was going to be called a novel. I mean, there's documentation, there's a lot of nonfiction in it. It's like a lot of poetic pages in it. So it's poetry. There's also translation in there. There's also drawings, right? So it's like, it's really like a hybrid work, right? But it's also like, there are novels that are like that, right? So, so for me, like, I definitely am not really concerned about genre. I just work with language, and whatever language tells me to do, or wherever it directs me, I'm just like open to go with it.
I love that. I feel like the more I've been writing, the more I identify in that same way of like, gender is a social construct. So like, genre is the social construct. Like, why do we have to have such a rigid definition between, it's all using language. So like, even in my book, even what I read just for the start of this, I actually published that as a lyric essay. I considered it a poem, but when I was sending it out, other people didn't consider it a poem. So it, like, for a year, nobody published it. And then I sent it in as a lyric essay, and it, like, right away. So one of the other poems was like a flash fiction piece that I published as a flash fiction. And so, I don't know, I was like, sure, it's whatever you think it is. Publish it, please.
I think for me, when I think about genre, the thing that comes to mind is like switching between forms. And yes, totally, I love that. Yes, genre is a construct. That should be a T-shirt. That's fantastic.
That's the name of this panel at this point.
Right, exactly. But for whatever that is, I find switching around has been really great. Like I was working on a short story that I abandoned. I worked on a pilot. I'm working on a screenplay. I'm just trying to try a lot of different ways to tell stories right now. Just kind of finding my way. And I find it so restorative and sometimes incredibly generative, because then when I go back to the new novel, or when I go back to the short story, or go somewhere else, it's like the different ways in which you tell those stories, I feel just kind of refreshes me to go in a different direction. And that's been a nice surprise. I thought it might be kind of overload, but I've found actually that it's really, it gives me like a little fresh air. It gives me a little boost back into a different project.
It's wonderful. So we're at our time. That's like, you guys are like perfect timing. I just wanted to say thank you to Booksmith for hosting. Thank you, Emily, Benjamin, Poupeh, for writing. Please, 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 anyone who's listening in, get a copy of all of these because they are phenomenal. And thank you so much, Evan.
Thank you. Thank you, Lupita. Thank you, authors Benjamin, Emily, Poupeh. You guys were all brilliant, and this has just been a lovely conversation. I've enjoyed very much. And yeah, you guys do what Lupita says. Go get those books if you don't have them. Get them for your friends and loved ones. Get them for your enemies. Make your enemies stronger. I think that's a good strategy, life strategy. Yeah, I just want to thank you all for tuning in tonight, and I hope we can meet in person soonish. But until then, it's really lovely to be able to meet here, and I'm appreciative and grateful that we have the space. So yeah, please take care and be safe out there, and support your local independent bookstores wherever you are, and also Booksmith wherever you are, and yeah, get these books. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lupita, for moderating. This has been wonderful. Good night, everybody. Take care. Good night.